Before you say anything, yes, the Christmas tree is still here. I call it seasonal denial. Let's just move on, shall we? This year I read 88 books, not that I had any particular goals, it just happened to be 88 books, and completely unintentionally, half of them exactly happened to be classics. I promise, I didn't plan it, and those classics turned out to be so good that they got their own video. Today we're talking about contemporary books, so 44 titles with only a small handful of non-fiction. Choosing was difficult, but in the end I simplified it by giving myself one criteria only, and that is a book had to be so good that it immediately made me crave reading more from the same author. And so the first category is page turners. The first title on this list is a bit of a surprise, including to myself, because that is Nesting by Roisín O'Donnell. This was longlisted for Women's Prize for Fiction, and actually at the time it wasn't, for various reasons, my favorite book to win Women's Prize for Fiction, and it didn't win. But do you know what? When I was looking at the overall list of all the contemporary books I read this year, this book impressed me so much because it achieved something that is very difficult to achieve, which is great study of characters presented with very much literary prose, but at the same time being quite pacey and being a page turner. We follow a woman in the aftermath of an abusive relationship which she has left behind, and she is now in this process of slowly and painfully trying to rebuild her sense of self and sense of safety. And this book received lots of praise for its treatment of psychological abuse. However, for me, what makes this novel stand out is the craft itself. It is surprisingly compulsive read, but without any shock tactics or melodrama. In fact, it reminds me a little bit of Daphne du Maurier's writing, which is also subtle and hypnotic at the same time. And in Nesting, you also don't realize how invested you are until you can't put the book down. Next, we have another debut novel, and that is Trespassers by Louise Kennedy. I was genuinely blown away when I realized that this was a debut novel. This is set during the Troubles in Northern Ireland. We follow a young female Catholic schoolteacher who enters into the secret romance with a Protestant lawyer. From the very beginning, there's tension, and there is that sense that something is terribly fragile and that things will not end well. This is a page turner not because of plot twists, but because of its atmosphere, which is very claustrophobic and relentless. And I think that's because the author achieves to somehow beautifully and so hauntingly present to us this interconnection between individual lives and individual dramas and this bigger political and societal background that is there throughout the whole novel. I'm not saying it's a perfect novel. It's not a perfect novel, but the talent here is undeniable. The next category is quietly powerful. And here I'm including an author that I have also included last year with a different book. And that author is Rónán Hession, this time with his second book that I have read, titled Panenka. This book is perfect for all of you who are fans of Stoner by John Williams. It gives me a little bit the same vibe, although Panenka is probably slightly more hopeful. Stoner is definitely more bleak in comparison. But in Panenka, we also follow a man who is simply trying to understand who he is for various reasons, which I am not going to dwell on here because I don't want to spoil the plot for you. He is at a stage in his life where he is trying to figure out who he is, but without ambition, without external validation. And this is one of those books that sneaks up on you. And really, this story is simply about kindness, also community, and the quiet courage that it takes to live life differently to the way you've been living before, or maybe to the way other people are living. Very little happens on the surface, and yet everything matters. And this is where I think Rónán Hession's talent really shines. This is what I saw in his first novel that I read, Leonard and Hungry Paul. There's something deeply humane in the way he treats the characters. He has this way of writing with subtle humor and certain warmth. If you love novels that celebrate small, ordinary lives that are maybe undergoing quiet inner transformation, this book is for you. And I have one more title in this category, and that is The Umbrella by Tove Ditlevsen. If you've been watching this channel, you know that I'm not the biggest fan of short stories, but this is a short story collection, and trust me, I am as surprised as you are. Getting this book was a last-minute decision. I didn't know anything about it. When I was helping out in a local bookstore during the Christmas season, I happened to see that book on a shelf in that bookstore. I opened it up and I fell in love with that book's first sentence. And at that point, I had no idea that this was a short story collection. I thought it was a short novella. I brought it home, I started reading it, and I couldn't stop reading it, which never happens for me with short stories. And now I can't wait to read this Danish author's famous memoir trilogy. But in these short stories, what you have is a common theme of this quiet desperation and longing and disappointment. There's something that feels the same when you read Sylvia Plath. These stories are also centered on women, actually not just women, different people, also children whose lives have been narrowed through circumstance or some kind of compromise. I would love for you to read this short story collection and tell me whether it resonated with you and which one was your favorite short story. The one that stayed with me the most was One Morning in a Residential Neighborhood, especially the last piece of the dialogue in there. Just so sharp and so emotionally devastating. There's something very piercing about the writing here. I was so impressed how Ditlevsen has managed to put so much into these tiny few little pages. If you love Claire Keegan and you think she is very skilled at compacting such huge messages into a small few pages, do check out this short story collection because I promise you it will blow you away. The next category is the best protagonist, and of course the first title in this list has to be Drive the Plow Over the Bones of the Dead by Olga Tokarczuk. Yes, she won a Nobel Prize, and this book in particular has been praised for its philosophical, political, ecological themes, all hidden behind this what seems to be a crime novel. But for me, what elevated this novel really was the main protagonist, who hands down must be the most unique protagonist I have ever read, because the main protagonist is this 60-year-old woman who lives in a very secluded area, and she is a very difficult woman. She has very strong opinions, she's very eccentric, and what Tokarczuk manages to do here is to first present as this extreme anti-hero, and by the end of the story, that anti-hero has become your favorite hero ever, and the journey of that character is the most satisfying journey. I am not going to be telling you much about the plot, because this is one of those books that is very hard to talk about without spoiling it for you. This is simply a must read. If you haven't read it yet, please do check it out. And then the second title I included in this list is The Wolf Border by Sarah Hall. Now, Sarah Hall is getting lots of exposure at the moment with her latest book, Helm, and I will definitely read it. And just like in Helm, in The Wolf Border, you also have this profound commentary on human connection to nature. But for me, it's Rachel Kane, the main protagonist, that I have been thinking about since I read this book in January. And actually, if you asked me in January last year whether this book would find its way into my top books of the year, I probably would have said no at that point. But the way the main character has stayed with me, I do think that this book deserves its place on this list. So, who is Rachel Kane? She is a biologist who returns from the US to England to lead this controversial project of rewilding a private estate of this aristocrat and reinstating wolves onto that estate. And here is where, in my opinion, Sarah Hall's skill lies. She can create a protagonist that is complex, but also that theoretically we should feel quite judgmental about, and yet we as readers feel like we deeply understand her, and that understanding of the main character comes very easy to us. There's something about the way Sarah Hall wrote this main character that feels raw and guarded almost, but at the same time intensely alive. The next category is best writing, and here this was very easy for me because the title that I knew I had to include here was Things I Don't Want to Know by Deborah Levy. This happens to be non-fiction, and I could have had a separate category for non-fiction, but I felt because I didn't read actually that much non-fiction, it wouldn't be entirely fair to assign an individual category to non-fiction. Instead, I've got this best writing category because yes, this is non-fiction, but the writing in here is just exquisite. And by the way, I have tried Deborah Levy's fiction and that didn't work for me as well. I didn't finish Hot Milk, which I did want to read in the summer. I ditched that. I did read all of her short stories in the collection titled Black Vodka, and that was okay, but it was really her autobiographical trilogy that I absolutely fell in love with. And out of those 3 books that I read, it was the first one, Things I Don't Want to Know, that resonated with me the most. I know loads of people really appreciate The Cost of Living, which is the second book in the trilogy, and I like that too. But for me, Things I Don't Want to Know, on top of the beautiful writing there, somehow it also managed to be a complete page turner. And when you think that this is a non-fiction, I think this is a huge achievement, because it's not often, for me at least, where non-fiction can be this engaging. The way Deborah Levy moves between political and personal feels so effortless. We've got the themes of the art of becoming a writer, but also we've got the themes of girlhood and ambition. I honestly think that Deborah Levy was born to write about life and about writing itself, and generally to write non-fiction. I also want to throw in here 2 honorable mentions, which are The Years by Annie Ernaux and The Details by Genberg. I won't dwell on them here. I will link my reviews for both of those books below, but they are both masterpieces when it comes to the quality of writing. The only reason why they happen to be honorable mentions on my list and not included in the category itself is because both of those books felt like a little bit of hard work to read for me personally, and I like to look at books a little bit more holistically. But if you're after extraordinary writing, please check out these 2 books. Interestingly, all the 3 titles in here have semi-autobiographical elements, and I wonder whether there is something about that intimacy that comes with writing about your own life that somehow also translates into the quality of writing. And finally, the best book overall, which originally I put into the first category, but then as I was creating my categories, I realized that this book probably belongs to every single category. And for that reason, I decided actually I need to make this book stand out, because this is the best contemporary read I experienced in 2025. And that is Olga by a German writer, Bernhard Schlink. Deceptively quiet and in many ways a strange novel that somehow manages also to be a page turner and also to have this most ordinary but at the same time most extraordinary protagonist. We follow Olga, who is a woman born into poverty in 19th century Germany, and we witness her life unfolding alongside some major historical events. There's nothing heroic about Olga in a traditional sense of the word, but Schlink has given her this quiet dignity and somewhat clarity that makes her completely unforgettable. And the writing, the writing. You've got these short, snappy chapters, so the structure is quite fragmented. But as soon as you finish one chapter, you want to keep going on to the next. This is one of those books that trusts you as a reader to sit with certain ambiguity and silence. It reminds me a little bit Theodore Fontaine's Effie Briest here, and coincidentally, that's also a German writer. But yes, if you like the books that don't over-explain things to you, this will be a real treat. I just love Schlink's understated writing, and I am now officially a Schlinkaholic. Yes, it's a term I have carved out for myself. I have got 3 of his other books on the shelf, and I'll definitely be reading them in 2026. Now, just like with the best classics of the year, I have been trying to figure out whether there is a common theme to all of these books that I selected as my best contemporary books of the year, and I guess there is one, I think, and that theme is compassion. When you look at each of these titles, compassion is a big theme in each of these books. Compassion for flawed people, for quiet lives, for difficult choices that are maybe not always easy to understand. And you know what? That theme of compassion does feel right, because we could do with more compassion both in literature and also in the real world. Please let me know in the comments which titles have stood out for you this year, because I always love receiving your recommendations and I love adding them to my TBR. And meanwhile, have a good weekend, and I'll see you as always next Friday. Bye for now.